Hi, this is Martin Brennand from Imagineer Systems. Today we're going to be looking at the top 5 things to look out for when using mocha in your workflow. We'd like to thank Artbeats for giving us generous use of their excellent footage. When exporting tracking data from mocha, you have a wide range of options. When you click on the Export Tracking Data button, you have a drop-down list of all the applications that mocha presently supports. Let's just quickly run through them now. After Effects CS4 Corner Pin supports specifically RG Warp and the Mocha import script for corner pin only. We then have another corner pin option for CS4 which supports the motion blur within After Effects. We then also have a legacy corner pin which helps support the After Effects CS3 and older versions. After Effects transform data only brings in position, scale and rotation data, as well as anchor point keys so that you can do stabilization. We also have Avid DS tracking data, digital fusion comp data, discrete point tracker and stabilizer data, which is for combustion, inferno, flame systems such as that. Final Cut basic motion, which is also the translation, rotation and scale, similar to After Effects transform data. We have Final Cut distort data, which is essentially the same as After Effects corner pin. Nuke ASCII tracking data, Quantel corner pinning data, Shake script transform data, and a vanilla XML motion matrix data format for various other uses. These options are obviously somewhat pared down in the lighter versions of the Mocha applications. For example, in Mocha for After Effects, we specifically have only After Effects CS4 corner pin in its various flavors, and After Effects transform data. Similarly, in Mocha for Final Cut, there's the export tracking data options of just basic motion and Final Cut distort. When working with bringing tracking data into Mocha for After Effects and Mocha for Final Cut specifically, there are a few gotchas to look out for. Here's an example where I want to track this speech bubble to this man's head in After Effects. If I go to Mocha for After Effects, you can see here I've already tracked the head all the way through the shot, and then it fades off up to the top. If I go down to my export tracking data, I want to choose from the drop-down box After Effects transform data, and then copy it to the clipboard. When I go back to After Effects, I can then paste it to my speech bubble, which I've got in the timeline. If I go ahead and paste it right here, you'll notice something wrong. If I press U on the timeline to look at all animated keys, you'll see that the keyframes start exactly at the point that I've pasted them. If I track backwards, the speech bubble doesn't go anywhere. I track forwards, the speech bubble starts from where the tracking began. So let's just undo that. If I want to actually paste this data in so it begins from the beginning, we have to actually paste it at frame 1. It will then follow through. Again, there's an issue here because it's not pasting to where I want it to be. I'm pasting it at the start, but my tracking for my speech bubble is right in the middle of the shot. So let's just undo that again. When you've got a situation like this, it's actually better to create a new null object by right-clicking, then paste your data to this object. Now you can see the tracking data is attached to the null. We can then move across to where we want the speech bubble to be attached to in the timeline, at this scale and this position, and then parent the speech bubble to the null with the pick whip. Going into our keyframe data, you'll notice something interesting. It doesn't quite go where it's supposed to. This is because there is still anchor point data in the shot. Anchor point is only required if you want to do stabilization, and actually acts as a counter to the position data. So if we turn anchor data off, we then find that it follows all the way through with all the correct tracking data. Keep in mind too that you don't need to keep all data. In this particular example, the speech bubble is rocking back and forth with the man's head. I'd prefer it to be stationary, so I can get it to a point where I want it here, go back to my null, and turn off my rotation, so I'm just left with position and scale. This means now that the speech bubble moves smoothly, without any additional rotation. Attaching the speech bubble to the null in this way also means that if at any time during the shot I want to change the speech bubble itself, I can move it around and it won't affect the animation that's applied to it. Let's now look at an example in Final Cut Pro. I've got the same project set up here with the speech bubble applied in the sequence, and I'm going to export the tracking data from Mocha for Final Cut. In Mocha for Final Cut we do exactly the same process, so we export the tracking data. In this case, because we're doing tracking, I just want the Final Cut basic motion and not the distortion data. And click Save. We give it a name. In this case I've already saved one called Head Track, and save that. Back in Final Cut, we have our sequence set up, so we can import by right-clicking in the bin and go to XML. We choose our head track, leave our settings unchanged, and it brings it in here in the bin. At the moment, if I drag this into the timeline of the sequence, it brings in a sequence of tracking data as well as the footage, which in this instance you wouldn't normally want to do. So let's just delete that. What we want to do is right-click our Mocha tracking data in the bin, go to Copy, right-click the speech bubble in our timeline, and choose Paste Attributes. Make sure this option here is checked. This means it applies the basic motion only. This option ends up applying only the position, rotation, and scale data from the tracking we imported. We can also go one step further with this and nest our sequence to get a little bit more control over it. So let's try that now. I'm just going to delete the speech bubble and bring in a new one. This time I'm going to go up to Sequence, Nest Items. Let's just call this something. Speech bubble sequence. What we can do then is copy the basic motion again. So we copy from the bin and paste attributes to the now nested sequence, again applying basic motion. We can then go into our speech bubble in the sequence and start adjusting parameters. Say for example around this point we want the speech bubble to be slightly larger. Now that we have the bubble clip inside a sequence, we can adjust its parameters inside that and move our center until it's in a position where we want it. It will then maintain that through the rest of the track. And that about wraps it up. To recap, check to see if the frame rate of your composition or sequence and the mocha project are the same. Check to see if the aspect ratio are the same. When you are corner pinning, the footage or image you are pinning must either be the same dimensions as the composition or pre-composed so it matches. If you're using interlaced footage, make sure your fields and pull down are matched in both applications, and make sure you're exporting and pasting your data to the right frame. This has been Martin Brennand for Imagineer Systems.